Okay, so I've been thinking for the last few years about sustainability of this thing that we spent 20 years building. First of all, nobody said it yet, but we're right almost on the 20th anniversary of the coining of the term open source. Everybody knows that. It's in February, but I believe at this event will be the first sort of party about that. So, and I'll have more about that in my talk, but I just want to be sure you guys know it's been 20 years. Some of us have been here that long. You've been hearing all morning about people's resumes. I have been here that long as well. I've been spending the last 5 years going, okay, great, we did really well. Now how do we make sure it doesn't all fall apart? And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. So that's kind of what this is about. The way that I work in open source is looking for problems and then trying to figure out how to be part of the solution. And that's what this is amusing on. So first of all, I want to say that people are amazing. People are amazing. And open source is amazing because of the people. It's you guys. It's everybody that's ever given a patch, right? And you have to remember that about open source. It's nice that there are companies that are IPOing. That's a good thing. It's a good engine. But fundamentally, this started out being about people who were really tired of the way that the software industry was working, right? We were tired of it. We were tired of crap software going out there and not being able to fix it, knowing that we knew how, and not having access to the source code because somebody wanted to maximize profit and decided to hide the code, right? That's why we did it. So we need to remember that, hold on to that memory, because I am convinced that this whole beautiful flowering will stop happening if we forget this, okay? So I remember what it was like working before. I worked for years at Apple before open source became a thing. Free software was already happening, but you know, free as in you can't make a living was a little troubling to me. And then I got involved in a project where my engineers couldn't see the code that they were working on because of an internal struggle that was happening inside of Apple. Oh my goodness, is that inefficient when your engineers are black boxing code that they wrote but they haven't seen recent changes on? And I said, something's got to change, right? Now, let me establish that I believe that the act of writing software is actually closer to being an artist than it is to being, say, a cog in a corporate wheel. And when you've spent a lot of time building something that you think is beautiful, that your friends think is beautiful, and the marketers and legal people take it and do things with it that you didn't like, you know, that can be really disheartening for the gentle spirits that create this stuff. And I saw that happening in the bad old days as well. And a lot of this is what the motivation for open source was. So we used to explain open source to people. I spent 10 years flying around the world explaining it to governments, and this is what we got a lot. Like, I don't see how the economics of this works. So why would I believe in this, you know? And it was really interesting because it was by country. Like some countries were like, yeah, this sounds really good. You know, and other countries were like, no, I don't get it. Like Switzerland, it just went right over their heads because they couldn't follow a money trail that made sense. And having them understand that it was about more than that was really, really, really hard. So the good news is now that open source has sort of won, you know, people now all believe that it's possible. Inner source has been happening for a long time, but you used to not hardly hear about it because there weren't companies that were prepared to believe that open source was going to win. Now all of a sudden, open source is, everybody knows that's the software that you want, and so how do I make that happen in my company, right? Whoops. So I think that open source is actually about enlightened self-interest at every stage. So originally we had hobbyists. They had day jobs. They worked at night on open source because it was more interesting than their day job. Now we have people who want to get their resume out there because they're hoping to get hired by a different company, or they want to show off their stuff. They want to job hop and get a better job. And having open source code out there as a resume is a really useful tool, right? But just remember, there's nothing wrong with enlightened self-interest as long as it's enlightened self-interest, okay? This guy, when I worked for Intel, they didn't yet think that Canonical was a real distro. I was trying to get them to pick up Canonical and support it and maybe drop a couple of the older ones that they were holding on to. And understand, being supported by Intel as a distro means that you get all the chipsets to test stuff on. It's more possible that you're going to work well. So it's a good thing to be in that team. They were very curious about Mark's motivations. Like, okay, the guy's been to space. He's got billions of dollars. Why is he doing this thing for free? Like, why is he doing this? Oh, and he lives in the Isle of Man. Does that mean he's money laundering through this company? Right? They really actually wondered that. And so I spent a fair amount of time talking to him about his motivations. And it turns out the most fun he ever had in his, at that point, short life was coding. And he just wanted to get back to it. But he also wanted to give something back. He felt gratitude for the life he'd been given. And he wanted to give something back. That was his whole motivation. And they didn't believe it for a long time, but we finally eventually got there, right? So when you hear people talk about the money flow, you lose this piece, right? We used to talk a lot about gift culture at the beginnings of open source. We commissioned a lot of research about why people do it. And remember, this was back when most people were not employed to do open source. These days, most people that do open source are employed to do it, and that's a good thing, right? But back when it was a gift culture, we talked about the difference between an impelled code give, like copyleft licensing, you must give up your changes, versus a gift of code, like from a permissive license like Apache, where you're not required to, but it makes your life easier if you give upstream stuff back, and it also makes everybody's world a little bit better. We talked about this a lot, and I think that we barely talk about it now, and that's really unfortunate. This was happening at the same time. I couldn't tell if you were going to be able to read that one. Figuring out what right livelihood looks like, right? When I pick a company, I try to do it based on right livelihood. Not who's going to optimize how much money I make, but am I going to feel good about this? I have left companies based on ethical concerns, and I've never been sorry about that. And I think that's also an open source ethic, and as that gets diluted by the inflush of money, I think we have problems. So we have to watch for that. Remember, you have a moral compass. This is about gift. This is about generosity and giving back for what you have. And it's not about how much you can get. It's about how much you can give. So, you're not going to be surprised to hear that I spend a lot of time in India, and I believe in Seva. Seva is being of service. How can I be of service to this community that has done so much? And I have some ideas about ways that you can do that, okay? For me, I got into it because I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. I thought that software engineering for pure profit was pretty corrupted because they had left out, what about the users? Oh, well, we'll just get them to upgrade. Ka-ching, right? That doesn't sound right to me if they've paid for it once, right? If you see a defect in software and you could fix it if you had the code, but you can't have the code because that's going to screw with somebody's profit, that doesn't sound right to me. That's why I got into it. People have different motivations, right? It occurs to me that we did not do a good job as a movement of documenting the lessons that we learned along the way to get to the place that we're at today. And so when I meet people that are just coming to open source, a lot of times I hear things that sound really dangerous to me. Like, how do we keep the VCs interested? Like, I promise you, if you write interesting software, the VCs will figure out how to be interested. You don't need to pander to them, not at all. Take their advice, maybe listen to them a little bit, but do not cross your moral compass because it's going to make the VC happy, right? Anyway, I'm in the process of working on a book that will be released for OSCON in July next year. It's another iteration of open sources. Open sources 3 this time, because we do one every 10 years apparently. And this one is meant to be an encapsulation of the stories that are important. Like the story about Mark, like the story about anybody coming into the project. So I think it would be good for you to think about stuff you've learned from your involvement in open source projects, and maybe you have a story that people need to hear in order to hold open source and go forward with it properly. And if you feel like maybe that's the case, then I would love to talk to you about that. We're going to be around for a couple of days doing that. But I hear some quick ideas of things that anybody can do, anybody in this audience can do to give back. First of all, mentor. My God, open source skills are still really rare in the larger scheme of things. And that's not good. We need more people to know how to do open source. So mentor, and especially mentor underrepresented people. There aren't enough girls in this room, right? Or people of color. Serve on a board. This is the OSI board last year. Almost every big project has a board behind it. Serve on it. Try to figure out how to do that. I've done a lot of this. It is really, really enlightening and worth doing. This one is about, this is a movie that we do a movie at pretty much every conference that we go to. And in order to get a ticket to the movie, you have to give to a nonprofit that's showing at the show. So we try to find ways to push people in the direction that they ought to be going anyway by giving, dangling a prize. I'm not saying this is the only way to do that, but think about ways to hack the system so that people, behave better, to their highest selves. And then hack your company if you can. I promise you that Sun had no interest in doing open office for the reasons I wanted to do it. They wanted to do it because it was going to hurt Microsoft. I wanted to do it because Microsoft only supported 13 languages worldwide, and I thought that was not good for people that were trying to learn how to do computing to have to also learn another language, human language. And this was an opportunity to make the digital divide a little bit smaller. Sun didn't care about any of that. They just wanted to hurt Microsoft. Figure out how to hack your company so that good matches the greed that your company, encompasses. And then try to hold love in all of this. I know it sounds trite, and I'm obviously a hippie, so I'm going to say that. But try to remember why it started, okay? This is the other reason that I wanted to get into it, because I believed this guy. Not everything he said, but I was in the Peace Corps, right? I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see. You guys can all do this too, and do well, I promise you. And I know younger people now are really impatient to hurry up and make money. It will come if you do the things that you love and you hold on to your ideals. It really will. So I'm going to suggest that you find the Open Source Initiative people at some point during this show, because I believe they have a timeline that you can place yourself on as a first step towards creating a better history of open source to help give people guideposts about where to go in the open source world next and how to not give up the game. And that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. Thank you.